When parents swoop in to resolve minor peer conflicts, they're depriving them of coping strategies that are going to be much more important for their long-term happiness.
This is Richard Weissbourd, Senior Lecturer on Education at Harvard, Faculty Director, Human Development and Psychology.
Because if kids can tune into other kids' feelings, they're going to have better relationships their whole lives. They're going to be better friends, romantic partners, parents, mentors.
I am Michael Goldstein, joined by Richard Weissbourd, and you are watching Q, Don't Tell.
Rick, it's an honor to have you here.
It's great to be here, Mike. I'm sorry we're not all in person, but it's great to be here on Zoom.
I wanted to start with my question, and I bet it's something a lot of parents wrestle with, which is, when should I be guiding my kids through modeling or cueing or encouragement? And when do I just straight up tell them what to do? Because I am the parent. And that's a question I often wrestle with.
In terms of telling kids what's right and wrong, I mean, one thing I think people often misunderstand is that by the time kids are 5 or 6 years old, they generally know what it's important to be caring, it's important to be honest, it's important to be fair. I remember walking in to, my daughter was 5 or 6, walking in a room, and a couple of her friends were there and giving them a question on a popular character education test. The question is, should you be honest with your teacher if you forget your homework? And one of my daughter's friends said to me, do you want me to tell you what you want to hear, or do you want me to tell you the truth? And another one of my daughter's friends said, I know you want me to be honest, but no 6-year-old would be honest about that. And it was eye-opening for me, because I realized that, a lot of the lectures about what's right and wrong are, in a sense, missing the point and can be patronizing to kids who know what's right or wrong. I think the much bigger deal is, how do you develop a moral identity? How do you develop a deep internal commitment to honesty and fairness and trust? How do those things become an integral part of the self? And, I think we do that when we model. I think we do that when we have high expectations for our kids, that they are going to pitch in and care for others. I think we do it when we develop the muscle of caring for others. So we require kids to do chores and to pitch in and to help out neighbors when they have opportunities to practice. When we develop a family identity, that we're a family that does service. In answer to your specific question, I think it's a great question. And I think there are a lot of distinctions that, one could make. And one distinction I would think about is if a child does something that violates one of your family norms, like if a child does something that is uncaring or racist or sexist, it's really important to say, this violates something we believe in the family, and here's why. In a complex situation where a child is trying to figure out what to do, should I want to invite this friend to my birthday, but my best friend doesn't like her? Is it okay to invite her where you have conflicting loyalties? I think much more appropriate as a parent to be curious and a resource. How do you think about this conflict? What would it mean to this friend if you didn't invite her? I think kids, if we don't want them to go underground, we really need to be available to them to help them think through a lot of situations where there are moral choices.
What you're describing is happening literally even right now, right? Like, one of our kids has a trip coming up, and there's a question of which friends are included and which ones aren't. And some of this stuff is happening outside of her control, but there's a question of, should she somehow lean in to try to pull other kids to make it more invitational, fair, and so forth. And I think a lot of times our approach to parenting too, I'd say between Prue, my wife, and me, Prue is like listener. And as a result, I think the kids really bring her those challenges and they talk them through fairly openly. I'm a little possibly too quick to say, look, here's what I think would be nice to do. I'm a little quick to get right to maybe to be the explainer. And what I'm hoping is the average of the two parenting styles is a good combo. And from the kids' point of view, they kind of pick which one they think they need in a particular situation.
You know, I think in your case, I would just do what Prue says to do.
That's smart in almost every situation.
Um, no, I think that, uh, I think what you're describing also describes the dynamic with my wife, with Avery. I think Avery tends to be a better listener, and I tend to want to weigh in some way with a judgment. And I think my kids also know that I'm not trying to end the conversation. I'm trying to begin it. I'm not asserting a judgment in a way that tries to shut them down. I'm just telling them what I think, and you tell me what you think. And so, I think you're right. I think there are advantages to this. I mean, I think that, uh, you know, my kids sometimes really don't want me to weigh in. They just want somebody to listen. And I think other times they don't want just us to listen. They really want to know what we think. And the big issue is our attunement. Are we attuned to what they want at that particular moment?
Well, that's a good seg, by the way, what they want to, I think one of the surprising themes when I first read your book, 15 odd years ago, had to do with the topic of happiness. And correct me if I mischaracterize this, but I think one theme was American parents in particular prioritize the direct pursuit. I want to make my kid happy. And I think your research finds some interesting and surprising things that happen to children when their parent is essentially striving as happiness as their key outcome indicator rather than other things like moral development, be a good person.
No, I think the way you described it is exactly right. I think we're a happiness besotted, a happiness obsessed culture. And, when you ask parents, parents say to their kids all the time, the most important thing to me is that you're happy. And I think the kicker, to your point, is that when you focus too much on happiness and when you're too deliberate and intensive about cultivating happiness, you often can make your kids less happy and not more happy. And let me just give you a couple examples of what I mean. When parents swoop in to resolve minor peer conflicts because they're worried about their kids being in distress of some kind, or when they maneuver to get their kids on winning teams because they don't want their kids to lose, in the name of protecting their kids' moment-to-moment happiness, they're depriving them of coping strategies that are going to be much more important for their long-term happiness. I think it's very important for parents to help kids identify and articulate their feelings. You know me for a long time. I feel that way. And boys especially need to be able to express their feelings. But particularly in middle class and upper class communities in this country, there's a degree to which parents are policing their kids' feelings. The mood meteorologists, they're noting their kids' feelings sometimes every 10 minutes. That must make you frustrated. That must make you sad. That must make you angry. And here again, I think that can cause their kids to turn their inner lives into theater, to become sort of consumed by their feelings and to make their own feelings too precious. And parents would do better by helping kids tune into other kids' feelings. And if on the playground, for example, and if parents themselves tune into other kids' feelings on the playground. Because if kids can tune into other kids' feelings, they're going to have better relationships their whole lives. They're going to be better friends, romantic partners, parents, mentors, and durable relationships. Being appreciated by people who appreciate you are the strongest source of happiness that we have, the most durable and robust source of happiness that we have. So here again, I feel like this is a situation where in the name of trying to preserve or promote kids' moment-to-moment happiness, we deprive them of a capacity that's so important for their long-term well-being and happiness.
Yeah, I certainly see versions of what you're describing around me sometimes where I feel like there's a type of almost therapist parent who's always over asking their kid, how are you doing? And the kid's kind of internalizing, I guess it's all about me and how I feel in exactly the negative way you're describing. I see uh, some classmates of my children where the parent is pushing relentlessly for this quest towards elite college admissions. And what's your response to a parent who maybe has a young enough child that they're not yet at that moment of, directly pursuing college admissions, but it's somewhat on the horizon. And if you could speak frankly to them, and their default setting is like, you got to do the hardest academics and you got to do all the extracurriculars and you've got to distinguish yourself because that's the only way where you're going to get to go to Yale. What do you advise those parents while they still have time potentially to consider whether there might be another path for that?
I think this is a kind of a kind of disease that I had when I was in high school that we all have, that I should say we all have, in many middle and upper class communities, people have, that their kids are gonna are gonna plummet or just never be fully realized if they don't go to one of these highly selected colleges. And it's just a complete myth. I mean, it's a complete myth in the sense that there are hundreds of great colleges in this country. And we have a lot of data at this point that shows you can go to hundreds of colleges and do very well in life. And it matters much more whether you're engaged in college than which college you go to. So you can go to, Northern Illinois State University, and it can be an open admissions college. And if you're really engaged, you can get to the same place as somebody who goes to Stanford or Harvard. And people, sometimes say it's hypocritical of me, and my kids have said this is hypocritical because I teach at Harvard. And I think Harvard's a great place to go too. My point is that there are hundreds of great places to go. And as parents, I think we really have to think about how much this is about our status concerns, how much is this about our competitive feelings with other parents, because the reality is that we live in a country, I mean, across the world to some extent, where there are a lot of great colleges.
Yes. But the kids, interestingly, to some degree, to different degrees, they put pressure on themselves to excel. It's not coming from us as parents, but they feel it. And in particular, since we work with kids on their math, we do see a lot of anxiety that comes from the academic load. I would sort of say two types of academic anxiety. One is just, I want to do excellent on the test, and I'm frustrated if I don't hit excellence. The second version, I think, for some kids, particularly in math, is conceptually, they start to lose, as math gets progressively harder and you move towards trig and calculus and so forth, they start to lose the plot a little bit on intuitively solving math. So they just feel a little bit lost as new problems or problem types are presented. Where does your mind go with that?
So I think it goes a couple places. One is, you're describing this with your own kids reminded me of a walk I had with my oldest son, who Jake.
Yeah.
And Jake was probably junior year in high school, and we were right at the beginning of this college process. And I remember saying to him, I just want you to know that where you go to college doesn't really matter to me. I mean, I want you to go to a place, it matters to me in the sense I want you to go to a place that's a really good fit for you, where you're going to learn a lot and you're going to work hard, but status doesn't matter to me. And he said to me, this was supposed to be a nice father-son walk, and he said to me in a pretty nice way, Dad, that is such crap. He said, you teach at Harvard. In this community, people are trying to get into these colleges. My cousins have gone to these colleges. You don't need to say a word, is what he was saying, because there's so many forces doing the muscling for you. So one of the things I would ask you about, your situation with your kids is there things in the water? Are there all kinds of forces that are creating pressure for your kids that you don't really talk about or you're not aware of. And um, because, you and Prue are both highly accomplished, they may be responding to that. They may be responding to other relatives, their grandparents, things in their school. So, one is being vigilant about the messages they're getting and counteracting them if you believe it's important to counteract them. But the other thing I think I would stress about this is I don't worry about kids being achievement focused. I don't worry about parents being achievement focused. It depends in this sense if kids are making the right meaning of it. So a lot of immigrant kids come to this country and they're working very hard and their parents have emphasized achievement because they want to support their families and they want to support their communities. That's an experience that tends not to create undue stress and anxiety. If you're working very hard because of your parents' status concerns and you feel like your parents care more about your achievement than they do about you, that's an experience that causes a lot of distress and anguish.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the meaning of it for a child is what's so key. And my guess is in knowing your kids a little bit, that there's a lot that they're interested in and motivated to work hard and they're motivated to want to do well. And it isn't about status for them, or worrying about disappointing you in some terrible way. And so it still may be too much, but it's likely to be far less harmful in the other circumstance I'm describing.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. One thought on, the academic achievement quest, at least in my experience, and I wonder sort of more clinically through research how this plays out, but I feel like fairly early on, kids develop a point of view of whether they're smart or not, almost in this binary way, right? At a fairly early age. And then they get updates as they get older. Like it's possible to think you're smart and then hit a point in school where your grades are low and you change your mind. I guess I'm not that smart. I wonder, as I describe that, does any research come to mind that would either validate or oppose this idea of kids developing this strong academic identity and it mattering for the rest of their lives?
Words like smart or intelligent are obscuring more than they reveal from my point of view. That I believe, like Howard Gardner was right about multiple intelligences, that people have all kinds of different intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, intelligence with art, intelligence with words, intelligence with numbers. And that when we categorize so globally like this, we are pushing kids to make these judgments about whether they're smart or not smart. And Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset, much more helpful, I think, to convey to kids that smart is something that you can obtain through work. It's not something you inherit.
Yeah.
And I think that work is exactly right. And she has the data to support that when you are, really cultivate a growth mindset, kids do better than if you treat intelligence as fixed. I think, a whole other aspect of this is that there's such a growing body of research that shows that your social emotional intelligence or social emotional skills are so important for college success and work success. So I think as a school, it's important to develop an academic identity. And tell me if I'm answering your question. It's really important to develop an academic identity. But the other issue is that if you're a high school student and you're not doing really well in school and you're not especially popular and you're not a good athlete, you may feel like a loser the whole time you're in high school.
Yeah. Yep.
You're a feisty, soulful, funny, kind, wonderful kid and feel like a loser every day of high school because you're not meeting those metrics. And I think that means that schools have to have a broader array of metrics and more fine-grained metrics. So they are, in different ways, capturing the strengths of kids who are soulful and kind and funny and artistic and many other qualities than popular and smart and athletic.
Rick, one big parenting challenge that has really, I know you're familiar with the data, but it sort of bypassed your children, and your grandchildren aren't yet old enough to be facing this, which is smartphones. And I feel like if I end up in a chat with another parent of a teenager, the gravitational pull towards this conversation about the time spent on smartphones and how it affects all these other parts of the kid's life comes up a lot. What does the research say? What is your general broad take on screen time for teenagers in particular and how it affects their development?
So it's a really complicated question, and the research is all over the place. But I will I'll share a couple thoughts about it. On the one hand, there's a case that people like Jonathan Haidt are making and Jean Twenge that the mental health crisis among teens, and by the way, young adults are doing much worse than teens are, and parents are doing about as badly as teens are in terms of anxiety and depression. But a lot of teens have anxiety and depression, and they're making the case that around 2010, 2012, you see this spike in mental health challenges among teenagers in this country. You see it in several other countries as well. And it coincides exactly with the introduction of smartphones. And so smartphones, in a sense, are the culprit here. I don't think there's any question that smartphones are one driver of this, that there's some kids who experience with their smartphones the constant comparisons with other people, the exposure to bad news, predatory behavior, pornography. I mean, all kinds of things that are bad for kids. But I think it's a really complicated story. And it's complicated for this reason, that young kids, 3 to 4, 5-year-olds, we're seeing rises in anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression have been rising from college students for 40 years. So I think there's a lot of other things going on here than smartphones. And the research on smartphones tends to land, the very good research, with it depends. Some kids are really hurt by technology and smartphones, and other kids are helped. You know, LGBTQIA kids find other LGBTQIA kids. Kids find people who are like them. Kids get important resources about mental health or about sexuality that they don't get from their parents or some other place. Kids join causes on social media. So I worry about social media. I think, to answer your question more directly, I think it is one driver. I think that kids should not have cell phones in schools. I would ban them completely. I think that I would wait to give kids smartphones. I don't know the exact age, but I think past
We did 12.
12, yeah. I mean, I was going to say 13 or sort of the transition, but 12. I don't think that the amount of time that people are on smartphones or technology can possibly be helpful to kids in the long run. I think in-person interaction is restorative in a way that online interaction is not. But I also don't think smartphones are the only problem here. And I think there's a tendency just to blame smartphones when there are a lot of other things going on.
What's your advice, most basic advice to parents about nudging your kid to try things, anything, so long as it kind of gets them out of the house and doing something productive?
I mean, generally, I'm super in favor of nudging kids to do a variety of things and to see what they respond to, what really resonates with them, what motivates them. I'm also aware that there's a point it's really important to understand what kids' resistance is in those situations. That is trying out for the school play going to disconnect that kid from a group of friends online that are very important to them? And it's just really important to be aware of what a kid is feeling like they're giving up or losing, and whether that can be replaced in some way. So I wouldn't be too, sort of didactic about this. I would be exploratory with our kids about this, but toward the direction of their trying new things, and particularly, as I said, not spending too much time online because of the dangers of too much online time, but also the benefits of in-person contact. Let me just say one thing really quickly about that. I know we're in the lightning round, so I'm going to be super quick.
Okay.
in terms of the in-person contact, sometimes I feel like, the older generation is always thinking the next generation is more degraded than they are. And like we wanted to be outside playing and we want a lot of in-person contact. But in this case, when we interview high school and college kids, most of them don't want to be online too much. So I don't think this is just a matter of older adults, finger pointing or finger wagging, whatever the expression is, at younger kids. I think at some level, a lot of kids know this isn't healthy and they want a reason not to keep doing it all the time.
Rick, this is one of your books, The Parents We Need to Be. Is there another book that you've read that you think is very pragmatic and deals with the common types of questions parents have? Hey, my kid's not getting enough sleep. My kid's not really opening up to me. Like all that kind of stuff. Is there anything you would recommend or a resource you'd recommend that's kind of on the Rick favorite list?
Well, no book is nearly as good as mine, but
That's true, baby. I love it.
kidding. There are wonderful
He
books
is
out
kidding. He is kidding. Yes.
there. I am kidding, folks. Lisa D'Amour just wrote a book called The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. She's written books about girls. She's writing a book now on the emotional lives of parents. A very thoughtful, engaging thinker and writer, a psychologist with a lot of experience. Jenny Wallace just wrote a book about achievement pressure I think it's called Never Enough. Jennifer Wallace is her name, which I also think is a very good book about achievement pressure. Challenge Success at Stanford puts out a lot of very good work on achievement pressure as well. I'm still a fan of young kids with babies, of Barry Brazelton, and I think his books are really helpful in thinking about parenting young kids. Anyway, it sort of depends what field, but these are all books that I think are from thoughtful people who are insightful and accessible and engaging writers.
I just wonder about, in practical terms, like how do people do that? Because they don't get that many kids to practice on. They're only parenting a couple kids, maybe.
I can imagine creating a rule for ourselves, which is always ask 3 questions before you offer advice. 3 is a little arbitrary, at least 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, 3 or go 4. We're Jewish. Could be 4 questions. I don't know if any of our listeners pick up on that, but that's a thing in Passover. But I like the idea, just the structure of having some easy way to remember before you give the advice. I find I have to try to almost bite my lip to let the kid even finish explaining their story, because halfway through I'm ready with my advice and I need to like hold it back.
Yeah. No, and I think there's a gender thing here. I mean, I don't know if you and I have talked about this before, but a lot of men are terrible at asking questions and inquiring. This is the mansplaining problem.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful for men in general to learn how to ask 3 questions, and questions that are deepening questions. And it's a great skill to have, and it's a powerful road to getting really to being close to people in much more meaningful ways too. So.
Rick, it's a great note to end on. The Q Don't Tell podcast and thinking about how we can better question our kids, I think, is a great parenting move that we could all probably use some practice on. Rick Weissbourd, thanks so much for joining us, and I'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate the good questions. Be well, everybody.